Hi everybody, so good to see you here this evening. As most of you know, my name is Manzini and I'm going to be your host for today. So thank you for choosing to spend this Tuesday evening with me, with us, as we are now going to be a community for the next couple of hours. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this specifically today is because it is the anniversary of the day that Mark Duggan was killed. And in relation to the film that we'll be looking at, Clemency, we thought that it would be really important to acknowledge that and acknowledge what's happening within the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's going to be like the overall theme of the things that we're talking about today. We'll have a Q&A. I'll share a poem in response to Clemency, and then you guys will all get to write your own pieces of poetry as well. So it will be a Tuesday well spent, I promise. I need to do a few introductions, so you can probably hear that there is quite a lot going on in the background. I am in sunny Vauxhall. Anyone who knows me knows I'm an East Ender, but Bird's Eye View has managed to get me this side of the river, so I'm in Bird's Eye View Towers. And Bird's Eye View is a charity, and their mission is to bring ever greater audiences to films by women. It's a charity that you should definitely support, so please check them out at Bird's Eye View on all of their socials, and we collaborate a lot. So I'm the director of Caramel Film Club, and we spotlight films with Black talent. And so our mission is to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else, which is I didn't see a version of myself until I was in my mid-20s, and everyone deserves to see a version of themselves on screen. I'm sure you will agree. So with those introductions done, I would like to go into our Q&A, which is with a wonderful broadcaster called Keme Nzerem, and he works for Channel 4 currently. But what's really interesting and why we invited him here today is that he covered the Mark Duggan story at the time, and he also most recently covered the Black Lives Matter story as well, and the protests that were happening in London. He is also in the process of making his first feature, so he's a perfect guest for us. So Keme, welcome.
Thanks, B. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this lovely, if you're in London, the weather's fantastic, and it's really heartening to see people choosing to be with us on such a lovely evening.
Yeah, indeed. So should we get straight into it? And you're going to have to excuse, there's not much I can do about the background noise. But Keme, I'm really interested in terms of this notion that we have that the UK and the US is really, really, really different in terms of racial injustice or race relations. And we're obviously in a time where we've had George Floyd and that murder, and it's sparked off all of this stuff happening globally. How does it compare to what you saw and you experienced being on the ground with Mark Duggan?
That comparison that you've made is something that we kid ourselves in this country that we're not America. That British people and British history somehow has managed to erase our connection with the industrial genocide, enslavement of Africans, and the social restrictions that have been imposed since then. Obviously in America it was slightly more formalized, but we've been quite good here at hiding it away and making it somebody else's problem, something that happened elsewhere. And what we saw with Mark Duggan and the massively disproportionate violent policing of Black people and Black men was the Mark Duggan story. And how different is that really to what we saw more recently with George Floyd? Now, so in my view, we kid ourselves that we're not the same place. It manifests itself differently, but it is a much quieter and in some ways a much more insidious hiding of the reality. Now, I'm very lucky to have grown up in multicultural London. I was born in Africa. We moved around quite a lot. And my parents, you can probably tell, I'm of mixed heritage. My mother is white American of German and English heritage, and my father is an Igbo. He's from the southeast of Nigeria. And when they left Africa, they thought long and hard about where they wanted to bring a family up. And they very decisively chose the UK rather than America. But my dad has always said to me, at least in America, the racists will tell you that they're racist. So it's a complicated picture. And on a personal level, I have found the last few months exhilarating, exhausting, triggering, challenging, all of these things. And intellectually, I would like to think that this country is finally having a reckoning with its past that it has not had before. But a large part of me also thinks we have been here before. We have had Macpherson reports and navel gazing and moments after riots, like in 2011, when we've had to think, well, why is it that people are angry or frustrated? Or one looks at the stats and tries to understand, not just gender pay gap, but ethnic pay gaps, ethnicity pay gaps. And I worry that actually this moment will just become another one of those moments where there was an opportunity to change, and yet we didn't.
It's really interesting that you're saying that, because I think that this is the first time in my lifetime. I mean, I know I look like I'm 25, but I'm not. That's my son.
You do. So, 24.
Bless you. But you're right. I do remember times of hopefulness, especially in, pretty much the 80s. There were times in the flashes then. What do you think is going to take for it not to be a moment and for it to become a movement?
People talk about allyship, and actually, in the greater sense of the word, I think a lot of Brits are suddenly having conversations that they have never had before and taking action. And I think that is the hopeful bit. And if people can, for example, learn from somebody who unexpectedly was thrust into the limelight during the BLM protest, Patrick Hutchinson, the guy from Thornton Heath, who was photographed with a white counter-protester, statue defender, call him what you will, extracting him from a ruck that was about to get very, very unpleasant. I'm sure everybody here has seen that photo, and I think we can talk more about the provenance of that photo and why it perhaps appealed to the great British white public so much. One of the things that Patrick said to me when we interviewed him after that incident was, if only the police officers who were standing round when their colleague was kneeling on George Floyd's neck had intervened, if only they had intervened, then perhaps George Floyd would still be alive, which obviously is a metaphor and a parable for so much other stuff. But I hope that message, and I think it has to a degree, has started to filter through to people who have never had to think about what it is to be Black in this country. They've just never had to really think about it. But people have, I think, learnt that they now have to intervene, and whether it's because they see something, an act of violence being perpetrated, or whether it's perhaps because they realize that something isn't right in their workplace, that they're not interviewing a good number of people that truly represent modern Britain, that they are treating people in a way that is unfair, that they will intervene there too. So I think, and I hope, that what will change, if anything is to change, is that people learn from that one parable. I have to intervene. I cannot be a bystander anymore.
I like the fact that you touched on the fact that people are having this conversation in the way that they haven't before. And I think that I've definitely had that experience. And sometimes it has been challenging and tiring and uncomfortable. But I do think that we need to have those experiences as much as we can, or those conversations rather, as much as we can. I'm curious because you said about your heritage and having, you know, an Igbo father, and then, you know, having a white mother, and then you being racialized as a Black man.
Yeah.
How has this time been in that context? And also, I guess, you know, as a family man yourself.
Well, I'm clearly Black. I don't get, you know, the one drop rule doesn't give me a choice, right? And when I look at my, I don't know if anyone noticed my daughter. I have two beautiful daughters, and they look very different. And in fact, when I get my wider family with me, we run the gamut of beautiful, deep ebony, as displayed by my gracious host here, B, all the way through to you know, a wonderful pale freckly shade of off-white with green eyes. And that's my daughter. To see her, you wouldn't think that she is mixed race unless you know. And I think mixed race people are quite good at recognizing mix in other people, so the kind of facial structure. But to give you a kind of real example of what this has been like, the day of the big disturbance in central London, the Saturday when the far right groups gathered with far right leaning football hooligan groups and a number of uniformed military veterans. And I think the three groups are somewhat distinct, and they do different things and they stand for different stuff, but nonetheless they assembled in central London, and from very, very early in the morning they were drinking heavily. It was clear from the get-go that this was had the possibility that it was going to turn fairly ugly. And I was reporting there that day for Channel 4 News with two incredibly experienced colleagues, both white women in their late 40s, 50s. These are women who have reported in war zones. You know, they're tough media operators. And they were really quite surprised that they were really clear that I was being treated differently to what they would have expected from a white reporter. Now, of course, it's impossible for me to know because I don't know any different. And frankly, I thought that the experience of reporting there that day was not really any material difference to some of the more unpleasant football crowds that I've had to report on. So, for example, I was in Marseille in the Euros in 2016 when the Russian death squads were running amok, and that was really quite scary because those Russian firms, they wanted to hurt people. But on that day in central London, they were just a bunch of drunk, overweight, far-right people, essentially. I was clearly a Black man in their midst, and yet it still didn't really feel any different to what I would have expected from that crowd. So to your point, how has this experience been as somebody of mixed heritage? In lots of ways, it's really hard to answer that because it's just my reality. But I would just like to add one thing, actually. The really tiring, triggering thing that I think this has exposed for a lot of people of color is whilst our white allies, friends, colleagues may suddenly now be asking us questions about our experiences of racism or just existence, of just being. And I thank people for that, for taking that curiosity. At the same time, there is perhaps a bit of voyeurism in there. And when we think about it, you know, and all people of color will know how triggering it is to have to talk about when you have experienced these things. And I think one of the things that we as a society have learned about reliving trauma, when we look at the example of generally women who are survivors of sexual exploitation or sexual abuse, and trigger warning if there's anybody listening for whom this might pertain, I think generally we've got quite good at putting support and warnings around that. So if a woman has been a victim or a survivor of some, then we tend to say, look, if you want to talk about it, it's fine, and there's care. And in the legal, and in the media, legally, people have absolute anonymity. But we haven't done that for Black people, where suddenly people are asking us, what's it like to be Black? Tell us about the first, have you ever been abused? And we're expected to suddenly share all this stuff. And it's not fair to do that without giving us the support that we need to share it if we feel comfortable, and to not share it if we don't.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because actually the talking about and the re-talking about it can be a re-traumatization.
Really?
And living all of those, and especially if you're having the conversation multiple times. I mean, on the way here, a guy stopped me and just randomly said to me, you were a slave to my people. Big guy, tattoo, skinhead, you know, it's quite, yeah. And just randomly just came up to me, and I was like, this is why I don't go to the River. It's like, I was like, oh wow, this is a really perfect day for you to do that. But I think that
I'm sorry.
but when we look at like everyday racism and the accumulation of that and the fatigue of that, you know, and how actually, if you look at the stats, even in terms of COVID, right, why our community is being absolutely lashed by it. There are so many inequalities, not in terms of, you know, not just in terms of health and in terms of financially, but also just stress levels, like the everyday reality of living, even in London, and what you might come up against really unexpectedly.
And it's not just Black people, it's brown people as well. So the demonization, I think, of a lot of South Asian communities, you know, you probably saw the meme the other day. There was two stories were compared. The Jack Charlton's funeral procession cortege was just described as that, and yet a similar event with people of color was COVID deniers. You know, so this is not an even playing field.
No, it isn't. I'm interested too in terms of like covering the story, and I know that you interviewed Patrick, and I know that that was quite a controversial moment because people saw, you know, this Black man carrying this white man to safety in a situation that was potentially going to turn quite nasty. And it was really interesting to see what people had to say about it. Tell us a little bit, for people who haven't seen the interview, tell us a little bit about what it was like to speak to him and his friends. Sure.
So just to set the scene, which I hopefully isn't needed because I think most people have seen that photo. On the Saturday evening, the police had made it very clear that they wanted central London to be cleared of protesters. The far right groups, shorthand, had left Parliament Square at about 5 or 6. I think the curfew was imposed. There were a number of anti-racist groups. It was definitively not BLM. They had said, don't come down. So it was older anti-racist groups had started to leave Trafalgar Square, but there were minor sporadic fights. And in the South Bank, a group of drunk white men came upon a large group of Black youth. There was a fight, And this one guy, we now know his name was Bryn Male, retired transport police officer, Millwall fan, had been abandoned by his mates and stuff was about to go down. It was pretty ugly. Patrick and his mates are all fitness enthusiasts. Several of them are martial arts experts. They're all very, very fit and strong. They also run a security firm. They had said a few days before this march, when it was clear that there was a potential for trouble, that they were going to go up there not to protest. So even to have them described as BLM protesters, which they frequently are, they had not gone there. They had gone there to keep the peace, to stop stuff from boiling over. So, and, you know, we didn't know any of this when the photo was released. It was only on speaking to them on the Sunday morning that we got the full story. And what struck me most poignantly was that all of them say they were not there to save Bryn Male, the drunk Millwall fan, ex-British Transport Police officer who may or may not have far-right views. I've not interviewed Mr. Male, so I don't know. But they were not there to save him. The fact that they saved him, that they removed him from the melee, was one, something that any decent human being should do. And I know there are some people out there who would almost certainly say, well, hang on a minute, he deserved whatever he was about to get. But these are grown men. They don't, you know, they're security folk. So they're not in, you know, although they can fight, they're not into fighting. They saw a fight, they saw a guy about to get beaten up, kind of doctor's Hippocratic oath. If someone's going to get really hurt, you remove them because nobody wants to see that, right? That was the first point. Second point, actually, they weren't saving him at all. The people they were saving were the black youth who had some serious harm come to Bryn Male, and had those black youth ended up in front of the courts in the criminal justice system, the criminal justice system would not recognize the social situation, and the tales of that, as we know, go back 400 years. The criminal justice system would not recognize why there had been that fight. And those young black men would have been condemned essentially to a very, very serious criminal sentence. They were saving the future of black youth. They were not saving that guy. And I think that got lost in a lot of the coverage because, you know, black men are very rarely lionized by the media. We all know that we're a threat, or we're supposed to be a threat. Why on earth was it that George Floyd was routinely described as an unarmed black man? Like black men's business is to walk around regularly with pieces. You know, that's not the black men I know, right? We know that we are portrayed in a certain way, and society doesn't give us second chances. That's what they were there to do. And I hope that people listen to that message and understand why they felt so compelled to be there that evening, to stop the worst from happening.
So that is a good point to start talking about the film. We've got a couple more minutes with you. And I guess that unjust nature of the criminal system. Talk to us about your reaction to seeing Clemency from the viewpoint of someone who is creating a film, but also from, I guess, the viewpoint of what themes or what things stood out for you. And did you like it?
Yeah, you know, it's sometimes hard to attach the word like with a film or a work of art that is just so traumatic. It's traumatizing on many levels. It's the director. She has drawn 3 incredibly powerful performances from the leads, and to get inside the mind so so precisely of the prison warden, and to try and explore her frailty and to show her as a strong woman, a powerful woman, but a woman on the edge, a woman absolutely on the edge, hanging on for all she can. I think it's a phenomenal, as a work of art, it is a phenomenal work of art, and the performances are incredibly powerful and moving. And of course, it is left unresolved. And as a social statement, I think it tells us everything we need to know about. And the question you asked earlier, the difference between the US and the UK, one thing I think we have absolutely got right is that we do not have capital punishment in this country.
Yeah, even though it wasn't so long ago that we did. When was the last time capital punishment?
Well, one could argue 2011, when a certain person was shot dead by the police in the street, and that's a slightly different story. But 57, I think, was the last public hanging. But we cannot undo. One, who on earth gives us the right, whether one is of a religious bent or not? How can it be that a human can be gifted the right of taking another human's life? I do not understand that. And secondly, what happens when you get it wrong?
Yeah, and I guess I've been thinking a lot in this time about what is this notion of justice? What does it even mean? Because that's based on this eye for an eye, right? This sense of, in some cases, if you take a life, then your life is taken, or this notion of punishment. But I think what's really interesting about this time is that the argument in terms of like abolition, not just in terms of prisons, but also in terms of defunding the police, has really come to the fore in quite a loud way.
Indeed, and the policing should be a consensual matter. We kid ourselves that we have a policing system which is based on consent, that the police are there to look after us, and we all know that is not correct. That policing is there to protect vested interests. And I, as an adult with children, I oscillate between deeply understanding why so many of us are deeply opposed to snitching, because to side with the police to help them is to accept the inequity of the system. But on the other hand, at what stage do we stop and we say, enough's enough? I pays my taxes, man. You are here to police me in a positive way. And how do we as a society, and how do Black people in Britain move towards, how do we force the system to move towards policing us in the way that we would like them to police us, i.e. protecting us? So if anyone here has got any ideas on how to achieve that, I'd be very, very, very pleased to know.
I'm just going to read some of the comments, actually. So Mbeke said, I'm so empowered to hear this story, the story about Patrick, I'm assuming. For yes, it did get lost in the reporting. Kudos to those who made the decision to save the lives of those young Black men. And then Twain has said, let's not forget that our current Home Secretary stated capital punishment can act as a deterrent to serious crime.
True that, Twain.
Yeah. And I might go on.
I'm very curious that that the person who is nominally in charge of our police has views like that. I don't think that is that befits what most right-thinking Britons, whatever their ethnic heritage is, I think she's out of step. I hope she's out of step with public sentiment, but hey.
Yeah, I'm not so confident Brexit is happening. So let's see. Let's see. But on that note, thank you very, very much, Keme, for being here and talking with us.